I was halfway through mowing my tiny front lawn when I saw her again, Frances Delaney, the self-appointed queen of the Oak Ridge Pines HOA. She stood on the sidewalk like she owned it, arms crossed, lips pursed so tight it looked like she'd swallowed a lemon. Her clipboard was tucked under one arm like a weapon. "Mr. Corbin Ashby," she called out, drawing out each syllable like I was on trial. "We need to talk about your yard. Again." I killed the mower and wiped sweat off my forehead. "What now, Frances?" She strutted up my driveway like she was walking a red carpet. "Your grass is over 4 inches tall, and more importantly, the dry patches by your mailbox. That's a fire hazard. This entire property is non-compliant with HOA standards." I looked at the brown patches she was pointing at, maybe 10 square feet total. No dead trees, no piles of brush, just a couple spots that hadn't bounced back from last month's heat wave. "You're joking, right?" I asked. She didn't blink. "I'm issuing a formal citation. You'll need to resolve it within 72 hours or face a fine. Also, your trash bins were visible from the curb last Thursday, another violation. Frances, I work night shifts at the hospital. I wheel the bins out before I leave." "What do you want me to do, drag them back in at 2 in the morning? I want you to follow the rules," she snapped. "We all do. That's how a community stays beautiful." I stared at her, dumbfounded. I'd lived here 6 years, never had a single complaint until she became HOA president last spring. Now it was weekly fines, snide notes, and bogus violations. I'd tried reasoning, tried ignoring, but she kept escalating. The next morning, I found a bright orange notice duct taped to my door. "Final warning, fire hazard." I wasn't even mad, I was done. I took it down, walked back inside, and opened the manila folder I'd been quietly building for 3 months. Photos of her parked illegally in front of hydrants. Recordings of her yelling at teens riding bikes on the sidewalk. Screenshots of her public social media posts calling residents lazy slobs. Even a video of her trespassing into my backyard to measure the length of my grass with a ruler. No joke, I'd also gone through our bylaws, line by line. Turns out harassment by board members is grounds for removal. And if it causes emotional distress, civil penalties. So that afternoon, I drafted a formal complaint citing her behavior, complete with timestamps and attached evidence, and filed it with the city's Neighborhood Affairs Office. Then I mailed copies straight to the rest of the HOA board. Anonymously, of course. Frances thought she had the power. What she didn't know was that I had the receipts, and I was just getting started. On Thursday morning, I received a call from a woman named Deputy Claire Mendoza from the City Code Enforcement Office. Her tone was clipped but professional. "Mr. Ashby, I've reviewed your documentation. If even half of this holds up, your HOA president may be in serious violation of civil codes. I'm forwarding this to the city attorney's office." I leaned against the kitchen counter, coffee in hand, heart beating a little faster. So what happens next? She's overstepped her legal authority. There are boundaries even for HOA officers. If she's issuing fines outside of bylaws or targeting you personally, that's harassment. And if she's trespassing, that's criminal. I exhaled slowly. "I've got video of that, too." Deputy Mendoza paused. "Then you may have a stronger case than you think. I'll be in touch." By the weekend, the signs of fallout were already beginning. 2 board members, Thomas Rayburn and Leela Spencer, showed up at my door, not with a warning, but with a question. "Did you send us that packet?" Leela asked, her voice uncertain, eyes scanning my face. "I did," I said. "I thought you should know what your president is doing behind your backs." Thomas scratched the back of his neck. His polo shirt was neatly tucked in, but his expression was far from composed. "She told us you were a repeat offender, that you refused to comply with regulations, but that footage in your yard, that's not okay." "She's been manipulating the rules to target people who don't kiss her ring," I said. "I'm just the latest in a long line." Leela frowned. "She told the board there was a unanimous vote to issue a lien on your property if you didn't pay those fines." My eyebrows rose. "There hasn't even been a hearing." "Exactly." I opened the folder I'd kept on the kitchen counter and handed them both copies of the HOA bylaws with the relevant sections highlighted. No lien can be placed without due process and a vote recorded in the official minutes. Which, by the way, I requested 2 months ago. She denied it. That's a transparency violation. Thomas flipped through the pages, his jaw tightening. She said you were being disruptive. I work 12-hour shifts at the ER, I said. You think I have time to stage a rebellion? That got a dry laugh from Leela. She's been consolidating power, even tried to pass a new rule banning any lawn furniture not approved by the board. Claimed it was to maintain aesthetic standards. She ever get that approved? No. But she printed fake citations and started taping them to people's doors anyway. I nodded slowly. It's not just me then. Thomas folded the papers. We'll call an emergency meeting, not just the board, full community. This has to be addressed publicly. Make sure there's a legal observer, I said, and record everything. They left with a promise. I spent the rest of the day installing a second outdoor camera facing the street. Not because I expected retaliation, but because I'd learned what people like Frances do when cornered. The following Monday, I was walking back from the mailbox when I noticed a Mercedes idling at the curb. Inside sat a man in a gray suit, tapping away on a tablet. As I approached, he rolled down the window. Mr. Ashby. Yeah, he handed me a business card. Jordan Keene, City Attorney's Office. I'm investigating a complaint filed last week. Mind if I ask you a few questions? I nodded. Come on in. He asked about the timeline, the incidents, the false fines. I showed him the footage of Frances stepping onto my property uninvited, crouching near the mailbox with a tape measure. He watched it in silence, then jotted something in his notepad. Has she ever physically threatened you? No, but intimidation's been her go-to. He glanced up. You know she sent an email to the board suggesting you had connections to dangerous people and were aggressively unstable. I blinked. That's defamatory. Exactly. And if she sent that knowing it wasn't true, that's libel. You'd have grounds for civil litigation. I leaned back. She's really trying to paint me as a threat. She's trying to control a narrative that's falling apart. That night, I got a call from another neighbor, Greg, from 2 streets over. I'd only talked to him once before when his dog wandered into my yard, but now he sounded agitated. She's been doing the same to me and my wife. Claimed our garden was attracting rodents. We ripped it out last month. It's still in our mortgage documents. She convinced the board to fine us almost $1,000. You have paperwork, every receipt, every letter. I'll bring it to the meeting. By Wednesday night, the community center was packed. Not just the board, not just the usual retirees who came for coffee and complaints. It was standing room only. Nurses, teachers, veterans, even a few teenagers lined the back wall with phones out, recording. Frances walked in wearing a blazer like she was running for Congress. She barely acknowledged the crowd, took her seat at the center table, adjusted her mic, and cleared her throat. This emergency meeting, she began, was called under false pretenses. I want to remind everyone, we're here because you've broken the law, Thomas interrupted. And because we have evidence. The room buzzed. Leela stood, holding a folder identical to mine. We've reviewed the citations you issued. Over 20 of them have no legal basis. You signed off on them personally. Frances's voice went sharp. I was enforcing standards. You forged board votes, Leela said. You claimed unanimous decisions that never happened. You denied homeowners access to minutes and financial reports. That's embezzlement by omission. Frances turned to the audience. This is a smear campaign. Then Jordan Keene stood from his seat at the back. I'm with the city attorney's office. I've reviewed the documentation. Miss Delaney, you're under investigation for fraudulent governance, libel, and criminal trespass. The room fell silent. You can't be serious, she said, rising to her feet. You'll be receiving a formal notice. In the meantime, I'm instructing the board to suspend your authority pending investigation. People began clapping. A few stood. Greg raised his phone in the air and shouted, "Read the bylaws next time, Frances." She stormed out without another word. After the meeting, neighbors swarmed me, some thanking me, others asking what they could do to help. I told them the best thing was to stay involved, show up, and document everything. We didn't need a queen. We needed accountability. Back home, I sat on the porch, watching porch lights flicker on one by one down the street. For the first time in months, I didn't feel like I was under siege. I hadn't just bought a house here, I'd reclaimed it. and I wasn't about to let someone like Frances take that away from me or anyone else again. By the end of the week, Frances Delaney's name had disappeared from the HOA's website, her profile scrubbed from the leadership section without ceremony. But I wasn't celebrating just yet. I had a stack of unopened envelopes on my kitchen counter, fine notices and warnings she'd issued over the past few months, and I planned to challenge every one of them. The new acting president, Leela, arranged a formal review of all infractions issued under Frances's tenure. I attended the first session on a Friday afternoon in the community center's side office, where the board's legal counsel, a wiry man with silver hair named Robert Greaves, sat quietly with a folder thick enough to anchor a boat. "Mr. Ashby," he said, scanning my file, "these citations were processed without timestamps, documentation, or photographic evidence. That alone invalidates them, but we have larger concerns." He slid a document across the table. It was a financial disclosure form with Frances's signature. She authorized payments for landscaping services supposedly contracted to maintain community standards. Problem is, the vendor doesn't exist. The business license number on the invoices belongs to a frozen yogurt shop in Fresno. I blinked. She fabricated a vendor, Robert nodded. We believe she was funneling HOA funds through a shell company. The city's financial crimes unit is now involved. They've issued a subpoena for her banking records. I leaned back in the chair, letting the weight of it settle. So this was bigger than just harassment. She may have embezzled over $30,000, he said, and that's just what we can trace so far. Back at home, I updated my folder. I wasn't just collecting data anymore, I was building a case. My neighbor Greg dropped by with a flash drive containing screen captures from the HOA's private online portal. One file stood out. A draft resolution Frances had written that would have given her unilateral authority to impose emergency assessments without a vote. She never brought this for approval, Greg said, but she uploaded it, probably testing the waters. She was trying to rewrite our governing documents behind closed doors, I said. That's not just a power trip. That's premeditated fraud. The following Tuesday, 2 unmarked patrol cars parked across from her house. I watched from the sidewalk as a uniformed officer and a plainclothes detective knocked on her door. She cracked it open, but when they presented a warrant folder, the door swung wider. 10 minutes later, she was in handcuffs, her mouth moving rapidly, though I couldn't hear a word she said. Word spread like wildfire. By sunset, the neighborhood group chat was flooded with reactions, some stunned, others furious. People who'd remained silent were now coming forward. A retired Navy mechanic named Stewart revealed that Frances had threatened to report him for code violations if he didn't vote for her last spring. A woman 2 houses down had been fined for unauthorized fencing, even though her property line hadn't changed in 20 years. That night, I got a call from someone I didn't recognize. "Is this Corbin Ashby speaking?" "This is Detective Latham with the city's financial crimes unit. I'm reviewing your complaint and the materials you submitted. I'd like to confirm a few things regarding the surveillance footage you provided." He asked about the timestamp integrity, the chain of custody for the files, and whether I could testify to the location and authenticity of the recordings. "I installed the cameras myself," I said. "They're motion activated, and the footage is stored on a secure local server." "Good," he said. "We've corroborated some of the timeline using GPS data from Frances Delaney's phone. Her movements match the trespassing incidents." I paused. "Wait, she's being charged for that. Trespassing, misuse of public funds, falsifying legal documents, and obstructing board governance. The DA is considering adding intimidation and retaliatory harassment, depending on what else we find." The call ended, and I sat in the quiet hum of my living room. I hadn't expected it to go this far, but I wasn't sorry. 2 days later, I was invited to attend a special session at City Hall closed to the public, but open to involved parties. I walked in wearing the only suit I owned, sat at the long oak table across from a panel of officials, and answered every question they threw my way. "How many citations were issued against you personally?" 8. "Were any of them appealed through official HOA channels?" I tried. The appeals were either ignored or denied without explanation. Did you receive threats or coercive language in writing? Yes. I submitted copies in my complaint. Behind me, I could hear chairs shifting, pens scratching paper. The energy in the room was clinical but focused. This wasn't about neighborhood drama anymore. It was about accountability. After the session, a city legal aide pulled me aside. The board is being advised to initiate a full financial audit. You might want to keep your documentation organized. If this goes to civil court, your testimony could be pivotal. I nodded. Just let me know when. By the end of the month, the HOA board held an open forum to discuss systemic changes. This time, they brought in a third-party mediator, and the room was arranged in a circle instead of rows. Leela stood at the center, no longer just acting president. She'd been voted in unanimously. "We've failed to protect our residents from abuse of power," she said. "That ends now." She introduced a series of reforms: mandatory board transparency, a formal grievance process with independent oversight, and a motion to reimburse all improperly fined homeowners using the HOA's emergency fund. The crowd applauded. Some even stood. Then she turned to me. "Corbin, would you be willing to serve on the new oversight committee?" It caught me off guard. I wasn't looking to get involved in local politics, but I looked around at the faces in the room, people who'd been silenced, intimidated, or simply ignored. And I realized something. "I'll do it," I said, "but I want one condition." "What's that?" "No more meetings at 6 in the morning. I work nights." That got a laugh and more than a few nods. As people trickled out, Greg clapped me on the shoulder. "You realize you just became the most trusted guy in Oak Ridge Pines, right?" I smiled. "I didn't do it for that. I just got tired of being pushed around." "Still," he said, "you turned the whole place around." I walked home feeling lighter than I had in months. The air was still, the porch lights glowing soft against the dusk. I didn't just reclaim my yard. I reclaimed a community. And I'd made sure that no one, not even someone with a clipboard and a fake landscaping invoice, would ever try to take it from us again. The first meeting of the new HOA Oversight Committee was held in the back room of the local library, a space that smelled faintly of old paper and carpet cleaner. A whiteboard had been rolled in from another room, and someone had already written "Integrity First" across the top in red marker. Leela brought in a tray of bottled water and a stack of printed agendas. I took a seat near the window, grateful for the view of the parking lot. It made the room feel less like a tribunal. 2 other new committee members joined us. A contract lawyer named Meena Patel, who had lived in Oak Ridge Pines for less than a year, but had already built a reputation for cutting through red tape, and a soft-spoken postal carrier named Dennis, who'd lived here since the development broke ground 20 years ago. He carried a notebook with a rubber band around it and wrote everything down in shorthand. "Before we begin," Layla said, "there's something you all should see." She slid a manila folder onto the table and opened it to reveal a series of faded blueprints. At first, nothing seemed unusual, just standard lot layouts and boundary lines. Then I saw it 4 properties, including mine, had an additional marking, red slashes drawn over the back third of each parcel. "These were found during the audit," she said. Turns out Frances submitted a request to the county zoning office to reclassify parts of those lots as common green space. I leaned forward. "When?" "About a month before she posted those fake fire hazard notices." Mina's brow furrowed. "That would mean she was preparing to claim those parcels as HOA property." "Exactly," Layla said. "We checked with the county assessor's office. The documents were pulled before the change could go through, but the intent was there." "She was trying to seize private land," I said slowly. "And she started with mine." Dennis flipped through his notebook and spoke for the first time. "She held a closed-door session the week before that, said it was about long-term beautification, didn't take minutes, just said it was vision planning." Mina tapped the table. "That's not just unethical, that's unlawful under state property code. Attempted reclassification without a recorded vote. If she had succeeded, homeowners would have lost legal control over part of their land." "I've already contacted the zoning office," Leela said. "They're flagging any future requests involving Oak Ridge Pines. Nothing's moving without a public hearing now." I sat back in my chair, letting that sink in. Frances hadn't just abused her power, she had come within inches of rewriting our property lines. That night, I pulled out my own property deed and scanned it line by line. Everything checked out, but I couldn't shake the feeling that we might have only uncovered the tip of something deeper. I emailed Mina, asking if she'd be willing to meet again, just the two of us. We met at a coffee shop on the edge of town. She arrived in jeans and a hoodie, no briefcase, just a legal pad tucked under her arm. She was building something, I said, not just a power grab, a system. Mina nodded. I've seen it before. Someone gets control of a small body like an HOA, then starts creating dependency. Restrictive rules, vague citations, heavy fines. People stop pushing back because the process is exhausting. So what's the end game? I asked. She flipped a page. Control is addictive. But Frances also had another motive: money. She pushed a document across the table. It was a copy of a private grant application submitted to a nonprofit housing trust. The applicant, Oak Ridge Pines HOA. The proposal: conversion of underutilized private space to shared community gardens, for which the nonprofit would grant up to $50,000 in matching funds. She was trying to get paid for seizing parts of our yards, and she used falsified documents to prove community support, fake surveys, forged signatures. We've got 5 confirmed already. I stared at the paper. That's fraud on a state and federal level. I've already contacted the State Housing Commission, Mina said. They're opening an investigation. If she received even a cent of that funding, it's wire fraud. The next morning, Dennis called me. His voice was tighter than usual. You remember that lot on Marigold Drive? The one nobody ever uses. I did. A small, fenced-in space that was supposed to be a picnic area but had sat empty for years. Frances leased it to a private landscaping company, he said. They've been billing the HOA for maintenance, but they never actually show up. How do you know? I deliver mail to their listed address. It's a UPS drop box. By the end of the week, the city's financial crimes unit had added 2 more charges to the investigation: misappropriation of HOA funds and procurement fraud. Frances's bank accounts were frozen. A temporary administrator was assigned to manage any pending HOA expenses. The final meeting before the annual community vote was held outdoors under string lights and a rented tent. Over 200 residents showed up, lawn chairs and all. The mood was cautious but hopeful. Leela stepped up to the portable mic. We've implemented everything we promised: open records, transparent budgeting, and a resident-run oversight committee. But now we need to decide how we move forward. She gestured to the ballot table. You'll be voting on new board members, a revised charter, and whether to pursue civil restitution from the former president. Dennis stood next. We're also proposing a cap on fines and a required third-party review before any citation is issued. Applause broke out. Not polite clapping, real, sustained approval. When it was my turn to speak, I kept it brief. None of this should have happened, but it did. And the only reason it didn't go further is because people stopped being afraid of paperwork and politics. We pushed back. We demanded answers. And now, we're taking back our homes. Voting took the rest of the evening. When the results were announced, every reform passed by a landslide. Leela was re-elected. Mina and Dennis joined the permanent board, and the residents voted overwhelmingly to pursue civil damages against Frances. 2 weeks later, I testified in the first hearing. The judge was no nonsense, the kind who didn't waste time on theatrics. Frances sat at the defense table, her posture stiff, no sign of the smug confidence she used to carry when walking the neighborhood. Her attorney tried to argue that the citations were interpretations of the bylaws, not malicious, but the judge interrupted. You filed fraudulent grant applications. You forged community signatures. You attempted to rezone private land for personal gain. This is not interpretation. It is premeditated deception. The court ruled in favor of the HOA, awarding restitution for all improperly collected fines and misused funds. Frances was ordered to pay over $70,000 in damages and barred from holding any position in a homeowners association for 10 years. She left the courtroom without looking at anyone. Back in Oak Ridge Pines, the change was visible. The lawns weren't perfect, but they were lived in. Kids played in front yards again. Neighbors waved at each other instead of looking over their shoulders. I planted a new shade tree near the mailbox, the same spot she once called a fire hazard. Some neighbors offered to help, but I told them I had it covered. This was something I wanted to do myself. As I packed up my tools, Dennis walked by with his notebook tucked under one arm. "You ever think about running for the board next year?" he asked. I chuckled. "I think I've done my time." "You're the reason it's still a neighborhood," he said. I looked down the street, porches lit, windows open, people talking across fences. "No. We all are." And for the first time in a long while, it actually felt true.